Hi, everyone. Welcome to Best Practices Using Test Data Manager Data Assistant. I'm Pamela Deason, Marketing Manager for DevOps, and I have here with me today Satya Mahanti, the Senior Services Consultant for Test Data Manager, and he's going to be sharing with us, of course, about the Data Assistant and doing a brief demo for us.
Thank you very much, Pam, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So we are going to talk about a brand new capability that we are launching with TDM. It is, we think, going to be really revolutionary the way we can do test data, especially synthetic data creation, data subset, and data cloning. This new capability is called Data Assistant, and we'll learn more about that today. So we will proceed with today's presentation, a short presentation followed by a demo, as Pam was mentioning. And as part of Data Assistant, it is a heuristic model-based approach to synthetic data creation. And the main goal of Data Assistant is to ease up how much time and effort it actually takes to create data setup rules using the heuristic model templates. Using Data Assistant, we can get an extremely high degree of automation while building those data generation rules. It also really makes it much more easier than before to create data clones or clones of test data. And because all of that can be done now using the TDM portal, one of the biggest advantages of Data Assistant, or one of the biggest functionalities of Data Assistant rather, is it will enable you to use the TDM portal itself for doing data subsets. You may not need to go into data maker, GD subset, etc. You can do data subset directly from the TDM portal now using Data Assistant. And we are really excited about that also. Currently, this capability is available for SQL Server, for Oracle, DB2, PostgreSQL, and MySQL for now. And we are looking to add other databases as well, but this is what is supported in the GA version of Data Assistant. Now, with Data Assistant, it is broadly categorized as a two-step process. The first step is a prep. Now, the prep, we have tried to keep it as simple as we can. It is already the things that you do, which is you scan your data model, then you scan the tables for any sensitive or PII tags. With the data model, if you need to make any changes to the data model, you need to add a primary key, add a foreign key, add some relationships or remove relationships, so on and so forth. You can do all of that. And then you can also, we have a new capability is add, rather modify the table order. You can do that as well. And once that is all done, you register all of the tables. They'll show up as the objects on which the data system will build its rules on. The other part of the setup is basically to customize the data assistant templates. I'll show you in the demo how that is to be done. And once this part is done, now your setup for data assistant is when you select your tables where you want to populate your rules, either for data generation, data cloning, or data subset. Set the rule templates, the one that you would want, either customized or the one that we provide and ship out of the box. And you use data assistant to build the rules. It is as simple as that. And we'll look at how all of this is done as part of a quick demo. So the data assistant capability, as I said, will be able to do synthetic data generation, data cloning, and data subset all from the TDM portal using data assistant. And for that, we'll now move over into a quick demo. So for data assistant, this will be entirely a portal-based capability, the TDM portal-based capability. We will, for as part of data assistant, we will see a new section here under configuration called data assistant. So when you click on that is where you would see those heuristic rule models. There are 4 types of rules. I'm going to talk about the standard and default together, because they will essentially enable you to create your synthetic data rules. And then the clone rules, the 2 varieties of that, which is the default clone rule and the crawler clone rule, they will be used for both data cloning and for data subsets. Now, the standard rule, uh, this is going to be a JSON file that you can download, and you can also make changes and upload it back into the TDM portal, and it will show up here either when you make a change to it, either as a global template or as a project template. So the standard rule essentially tells TDM how to create a data generation rule function or a meta function for a separate or a distinct column type. Like for example, if we have a primary key which is numeric, or a primary sub-primary key which is numeric, what sort of default rules to apply for that column definition or for that column type. Similarly, for a primary key for a character, primary key for a date, primary key for a time, then the same set repeats for a foreign key. So how would you determine a foreign key for a time, for a number, foreign key for a character, sub key for a character, so on and so forth. As part of this, we have introduced some new functions, like for example, the parent meta function here and the ref column name function here will be replaced when the data assistant creates those functions with the actual parent name for the table in question. We also have rules how are mandatory columns handled, as well as how optional columns are handled. In each of those cases, we have also got a variety of new functions which have been introduced, and we will have details of all of that from the TechDoc site, where you can refer to what each of these does. The second heuristic model, which works together with the standard rules, is what is called as the tag rules. Now, think of a scenario that when you use your standard rules to build your data generation function, you have a column which is of a character type, and it has a minimum and a maximum length between 10 to 15. So TDM will create a function which will create maybe random characters in length between 10 to 15, right? So we don't want that for a column which is supposed to hold a name or an email address or a crime or a social security number or an SIN, so on and so forth. So in that scenario, for columns like that, where we want the data to look like real data, but be synthetically generated, the tag rules comes into play, wherein for hypothetically a name column, you will be able to create a real looking name from a seed list. Same thing for a city, state, zip, or for a social or SIN or any other kind of typical PII columns that you would be doing anyway as part of your PII discovery. So the combination of the standard rule and the tag rule together will create the first set of heuristic models which is going to be used by TDM for synthetic data generation. Coming to cloning and data subsets. Cloning as a functionality is you use when, let's say, you have one account or you've got this one member which business is using and you want to make 10 more of them. In that scenario, you would be able to use the clone functionality to say this one account which I have, make 20 copies of it. Keep the nature of the data the same, but still make it look like they're all different copies, which can be used as is as the original copy was. The subset, of course, is when you need to get a subset of data, which is if your production has got a million rows for the whole application of a million accounts across 500 tables, the subset will let you copy the data for 20 of the accounts from those 500 tables into a non-prod environment. Um, the differences between the clone and the subset, the rule will be the same, the rule engine will be the same, but the implementation of it will be slightly different, but they will be both using the clone model. The crawler model is something similar. However, in the case of a scenario where you have got very complex data models, 8, 10, 15 levels of joins, the clone rule for both subset and for cloning will create a join for that lowest level of the table, join from the primary table, and that would mean that you've got a very complex join which could become very expensive for the database to run. In that scenario, you could potentially choose to use a crawler, because the crawler will do the same subset and it will do the same clone, but now with the crawler subset or the crawler clone, the individual levels of data extraction are going to be kept in memory, and then each individual level will be extracted one after the other rather than through one massive join. So there is a significant improvement in performance. So again, you will have to choose when you would want to use a clone versus when you would want to use a crawler, but the end result is the same, with the one caveat that when you use a clone rule, you can additionally augment those specific columns, let's say with the tag rule, and you can use some other customized data generation meta functions as well. But with a clone rule, you will only be able to copy the data from the source. The only other addition that can happen to a clone rule, and again a new functionality and a new meta function we have added, is when you use the clone rule or the crawler rule, you can also choose to encrypt those specific columns. Let's say something containing an account number that you would might want to encrypt. You can do that as well via this new meta function that we have created for both the clone and the crawler rules. Now that we have seen what the standard rules, the tag rules, the clone and the crawler rules look like, we would then be able to, as I said, you can download them, you can make changes to them over here, you can add a new function, you can add a new tag rule for a different tag that you want to apply a data generation to make the data look real. You can do all of that. You can import it in here and it'll show up here either as a global template to be used by all the projects or as a project specific template as well. So now that the data assistant part is all done, then the rest of the setup is BAU, business as usual. And you have your environment, which can get created. In the environment, you have attached the environment to a specific, let's say, connection profile to point to your application database model. Once that is done, then you perform your modeling, which is you go in here and you say scan your data model. When you scan your data model, you will get the scanned data model created as you always do. Nothing has changed over this. You have your list of tables which make up your application. You have got the ER diagram view for the same. You can go in here, especially in the case of subset or a clone. You can go in here and you can make changes to the relationships. Let's say over here for the people table, you can add, modify, or change your relationships as you might need. Now, once that part is done, you are satisfied with how the data model now looks like with the modifications and the changes. It is extremely important then that you register your data model tables. The act of registration is really important because this is when your table order, the order in which the tables are going to be loaded with data, either for a generator or for a subset or for a clone, will be determined by the act of the registrations, almost like a database commit. So when you do that, you have your registered tables, and now you are all set to use data assistant to create your generators or your subsets or your clones. So for doing that, you go into your generator section and say create a new generator. Let's say I give it a name, gen data assistant, and I use that for the name of the generator. I can choose the database type as general as NoSQL, and you have a new option here which will say build with data assistant. So when you do that, you get this screen where you can now select all the tables which are there as part of your generator or your subset or your clone. Just to demonstrate how efficient this process is with data assistant, I'm going to choose all the tables, which is the 54 tables which make up my data model. Then I do a next. In the first part of this demo, when we are doing synthetic data generation, you can then use the standard rules, which is letting TDM or data assistant associate every column with a specific rules based on the data model, which is called the standard rules. So when you do that, if you remember the standard rules JSON of the heuristic model, based on how we have created this, you would see the same set of rules applied here, which is the defaulted one. You can of course change it, right, to be something else as well, which is also applicable for the same data type or the same column type. But essentially the default ones will point to what you set up here in your JSON model. Once you are satisfied and happy with all of this, you can do a next. And as I mentioned, for a column which might contain a name, you'd want to, or a social or SIN or an address or a email address, right? You would want that to be more real looking, and you can do that by the tag rules. So you can also select your tag rules. Again, if you have something custom built here, they'll show up here again as a global tag rule or a project level tag rule, right? And as you can see here, the corresponding meta functions corresponding to an age, a city, a postcode, etc., have been will be used with the data generator function. Then you do a next, and now you have a list of all the tables which is selected in the first screen for doing the build with data assistant. Then you can do a save here, which will create all of the rules corresponding to all of these tables which you selected, and use data assistant to a starting point. Now if you think about it, right, I had 54 tables, probably a few thousand columns. It took me less than 5 minutes to set up a data generation rule for each of these columns, right? And for a column type like a name, which we had in that people table, we will now have a meta function which will create real looking names. And this will also take care of all of those foreign key relationships, all those table relationships which are necessary for the data to really work out of the box, right? So this is all completely manually set up. Then you go ahead and publish this. Now you have your table order as well as to how will the data get loaded, and you can then choose the connection profile where you want to publish your data in. And now you can then go ahead and publish and saying, how many rows of this data do I want to create. One more new capability we've added here, which is called batch processing, wherein you will be now able to select to commit to the database in batches. So this will also significantly speed up how quickly can you create your data generation rules to apply, or rather how quickly can the generated rows be committed and applied on the database. So this is the first part of using data assistant to quickly create your data generators. The one important thing that we also needed to mention, which I missed, was essentially when you create your data model and you registered your data model, you would then be able to see the order where the tables were created. With the new capability of data assistant, on the data model object screen, you can also change your model and change your table load order. Let's say you wanted the count periods to not load as the first table, but let's say as the 14th table. You can as easily as drag and drop and place it where you want it to be. And now this is going to be the new table load order, right? So this is a new capability that we've also introduced, that if you are not satisfied or you want to modify your table load order, you can do that also from the object screen prior to the data generator creation. All right, so now the second capability on the data assistant is you can use it to create a subset or a clone. They work in a very similar fashion. The difference is when you do a subset, you are moving data, let's say for the 500 tables which make up your application, for the 20 accounts that you want to subset, or the 1 year date range of data that you want to move down across all of the tables which make up your application, that you are moving from a source to a destination, right? Usually the source and destination are different. The source could be a pre-prod, the destination could be any non-prod environment. In the case of clone, in the same environment, you are making, let's say, 20 copies of the one account that you want to make a clone out of. So in the case of a clone, your target and your source could be the same environment, but in the case of a subset, usually your source and your target are a different environment. But the setup for the both are very similar, and we'll show that as part of the next section. Is best I create a new generator. I'm going to call it as subset data assistant demo. I give it a relevant description, and I again click with build with data assistant. The next section is similar. You select all the tables which you want to include as part of your subset. Then you do a next. As part of the selection of the rules, you don't select the standard rules now, because you typically would use them for doing your data generation creation. You would either choose your cloning rule if you, in addition to doing your subset or your clone, you also want to do some level of data transformation, or you would want to choose your crawler clone rule, in which case you've got extremely complex joins and you do not and need not do transformations on the fly. So in this case, let's say I'm going to choose the clone rules. The clone rule here will again mimic the same set of rules we have in the JSON, where for the cloning rule, for a primary key, what is the default value which gets created. So again, when we do the clone, there are broadly three types of functions which get applied. The first one is the clone function, which is keep the data the same as the source. Then you have the cross reference, um, and the XLOOKUP, wherein if you want to reference a different column or a different table or even a different database to make sure that the data will stay consistent across databases, you will be able to use these functions. Again, this is standard, already available out of the box as part of existing data generation meta functions, but these are the specific ones that we will be using as part of your subset or as part of your clone. So the default ones will show up here, and then you do a next. The tag rules, you can use them if you are using the clone option, not the crawler option. What the tag rules additionally lets you do, of course, is it let you create consistent data which look like real names or real addresses, so on and so forth. With a clone rule, you can still use them, and the tag rules, if you use them, they will override the clone rules for those specific columns which will have a tag. We will do a next. And here is the most important section for either a clone or a crawler, where let's say I want to a subset, a list of IDs for my driving table, which let's say is my people table. So typically when you would do a subset, I would say that for my driving table, and the key column on which I want to do a subset is, let's say, the ID column on the people table. So I will say, okay, do do a subset and get me all the rows which match the driving condition on my driving table people is people.id less than 10. And you also view a sample of that. What might that mean? And that'll show up here on my driving table. And additionally, you would see this filter symbol occurring on the driving table, and all of the related tables, the frequent flyer, the airline, the flight rules, so on and so forth, all of the hundreds, potentially thousands of tables which are there as part of a subset related to the driving table, which you already did as part of your data model scan, and the manual modifications there or the one-time modifications there, all of the related tables, the rule to join back to getting the referential data from the driving criteria will be automatically applied. Now, in the case of a subset, it will look something like this, right? So which will say, get me a subset of data which matches my condition. In the case of a clone, it will be, well, for this specific people.id is equal to, let's say, 1, which is, if I did a view sample again, so this data was not right. It was not -1, it was equal to 1. This was the data which I wanted to clone, right? So you would usually start with, this is the row of data that you would want to clone. So in that scenario, for this clone, you would usually use a equal to clause. You can, of course, use a different set of driving criteria as well. But for the most parts, in a general use case, you would use an equal to clause for a clone, and something else could be greater than, equal to, or a range for doing a subset. You can also introduce more complex queries here for different columns on the same driving table. So once you did that, you can also see here that the specific columns on the driving table, and even for the non-driving table, the grandchildren table, their tag rules which will get applied, they will also show up here. Once you did all of that, then you did a save, then your data clone or your data subset based on your driving table criteria will now get created. So if you went back here and you saw, if I, let's say, went back and scrolled into my people table, which was my driving table, where I had applied my subset criteria, let's say that is over there, you will be able to see that my rules were applied over here for my people table. At the same time, the columns which needed to be introduced with real looking values, like for example here the first name, those were done here as well, right? So again, when you are using a clone rule, you will be able to do these changes and the xref and those other functions as well to be able to move data between a source and a target, right? So when you go ahead and publish this, and as the publish screen loads, typically when you would do a subset or a generator, again if you were using the a regular generator to create all of this, it will take a long time to create those rules. Over here, when we did the subset or the clone using data assistant, it happened within a fraction of a minute, right? So in the case of a subset, typically you would then choose a connection profile for the target which could be different from a source. In the case of a clone, you would typically use the same connection profile as your source so that you can make more clones or more copies of the same data. The second difference that you typically do is in the case of a subset, usually the table repeat count over here, this will correspond to your subset criteria condition. So which means your global repeat count, which is shown up here, because how many times each of these tables are going to be repeated, the global repeat count will usually be 1. But the table level repeat count will of course vary by the table depending on your driving criteria, right? In the case of a clone, it will be slightly different, right? That your table repeat counts can stay as they are for that specific scenario. But if you wanted to say, make me 100 clones of that ID is equal to 1, that can be accomplished by using the global repeat count, which will take care of the scenario that make 100 clones of that one account. And then you can go ahead and publish this data. If I did the same thing now using the crawler, which is the third capability, or rather the third type of publish, right? So we could do the generator using the standard rules and the tag rules. You can do the second section, which is you can create a clone or a subset using the clone rule, wherein in the clone rule you also have the ability to create additional meta functions to transform your data, or you could do the subset or the clone uh, for a crawler with the capability of doing a very efficient data movement between the source to the target using the crawler functionality, which does not build the join queries but rather uses almost like an in-memory level table level extraction to get the subsequent set of data for each and every table going forward. So you select again all the tables and you do a next. In the rule heuristic model rule selection screen, instead of the clone option, you use the crawler option. When you use the crawler option, all of the rules will be defaulted to clone. You can still use the clone encrypt for certain column types, but apart from that, the rest of the column types will always be clone. The clone encrypt, as I mentioned earlier, is a new meta function we have added where certain columns you can also encrypt. For example, a bank account number, something that you would not want to display even with masking. You can encrypt those columns, but the crawler rule will default everything to a clone. And you do a next. The same applies. You can go into the table hierarchy, you go into your driving table. If I again chose the same people table here, I can use a similar set of criteria. I would say that do a subset or do a clone for the people where the people ID either is less than 10, less than 20, or a more complex criteria, or let's say last time I did equal to 1, I could do less than 10. And so do a subset of all of the data where this driving criteria matches. And then when you save this, you will see that all of those generator based clone functions will now get built. And again, this is an extremely quick process. The whole setup takes less than a minute when you start to building a generator to when you actually have the clones. So as you can see here a clone function has been applied. A very important point is on this screen, you should not modify the clone function to something else, because then the clone generator might not work. It always has to be a clone for the clone based generator model to work. When you did a publish here, you would still get the same options. The table count with the crawler will be defaulted to 1, but at runtime, for every table, a different column number or number of rows will get applied, and that will get extracted from the source, be it from the subset or get replicated in the case of a clone. The same thing applies here again. You can choose a target connection profile. If it is going to be a subset, typically a different connection profile to a different environment, or if it is to a clone, potentially to the same one. And the same batch mode of processing is available, and you can do a publish. And the last piece in all of this is when you are doing a data generator, and I kept it for the very last because it will make more sense now, is if I said data assistant demo and try to create a new generator, and I kept the default type of general table type, selected all of my tables and did a next. If I use my standard rules for data creation and I did a next, you can use a tag rule, as I said, which will override your standard rules, and I did a next. I also have the ability here to apply a filter condition or a clone condition for certain columns. So meaning, if I wanted to then also clone this specific column for employee name, or let's say for this job title, or maybe for this address. So I can, if I apply a clone checkbox function here, this specific row of data will actually be cloned from the source and not be given a specific data generator rule, either with the standard rules or the tag rules. So again, I wanted to show this at the end because now when you understand the clone functionality, this will make more sense. Is when you use your data generator to create, or data assistant to create a generator based on the standard and the tag rules, you can also apply a clone function for specific columns. That will also an added functionality which data assistant can do. So the combination of all of this will let you either perform your data generator with real life data, maintaining your table hierarchy. It will let you create your subset directly from the portal without having to go into data subset or GT subset or data maker. It will let to create a clones of data as well. All of it directly from the data portal in a very easy to use model. And that's all that we have today. Hope you enjoyed this session. If you have any questions, do reach out to us and we'll be happy to take more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Satya, for everything that you shared today. I just want to remind everyone this is one video in a series of videos around best practices for our DevOps products. They all can be found on our Broadcom DevOps YouTube channel. I appreciate you joining today, and I hope you found this helpful. Bye for now.